Okay, let's dive right in. If you could, I don't know, make someone believe the sky was green just with a few words,
Hmm.
wouldn't you be curious about that kind of power?
Hmm. It's a powerful thought.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We're not talking fists today, but something subtler. Influence. Sometimes unsettling influence.
Right. Imagine a world where physical strength is, well, irrelevant. Where swaying opinions, shaping beliefs, that's the real currency.
Who holds the power then? Suddenly it's different.
It completely flips the script, doesn't it? And it forces us to look beyond, the obvious forms of control.
Because let's be honest, when we talk about getting your way without giving orders, the conversation often seems to drift towards gender.
It does, very quickly.
So we want to explore that, why that happens, not pointing fingers, just trying to get a clearer picture of this, well, very human dynamic.
Like, think about social media. Isn't a perfectly curated online image designed to make people feel envy or admiration?
Mhm.
Isn't that a form of subtle manipulation? Digital witchcraft, almost.
It's interesting, yeah. We see a clever ad that nudges our desires and think, oh, smart marketing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But if a friend plays on our sympathy to get help moving house,
yeah.
suddenly we might label that differently.
So where is the line? When does smart persuasion become something darker?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And what about societal expectations?
Tell me more.
Well, what if the way society often expects women to be, agreeable, accommodating, not making waves?
Mm-hmm.
What if that's inadvertently honed their skills in reading the room, in using indirect influence? Because maybe the direct route is, well, penalized.
So finding a detour isn't manipulation, it's strategic intelligence.
Hmm.
Adapting.
There's a definite logic there. If one path is blocked, and historically many where people get creative, they find another way.
Right.
It's not always about malice. It's about navigating the terrain you're given.
Yeah.
Like water, finding the cracks.
My grandmother used to say something. She'd say, honey, a sharp tongue can cut deeper than any knife and leave no bruises. She knew a thing or two about survival, I think.
She understood that unseen power.
So, back to the question. Is it manipulation if you're just using the only tool society seems to find acceptable for you? Or maybe the only tools you feel you have?
That's such a critical point. When direct assertion is discouraged for certain groups, indirect influence becomes, well, it becomes vital. It's a form of agency.
So maybe we're judging the tactic without seeing the constraints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are we judging the behavior in a vacuum, or are we considering the context of limitations imposed?
We have that saying, actions speak louder than words. But what if the right words, carefully chosen, are the most powerful action?
Oh, absolutely. Words can build worlds, or they can tear them down. They plant ideas, redirect thought.
In ways a punch never could.
Right. Think about rhetoric, persuasion throughout history. Language has always been a tool to shape reality.
So the ethics come in when?
I'd say the ethical line gets crossed when that shaping becomes purely self-serving, ignoring the other person's autonomy or well-being.
And historically, you see this pattern, right, in places where women couldn't hold property, couldn't vote.
Their influence flowed differently. Through social networks, emotional intelligence, subtle persuasion.
It's like influence rushes in to fill the void left by direct authority.
It really shows the resilience, doesn't it? The human drive to shape your own circumstances, even when the official levers of power are denied. People will find a way.
Okay, let's make this personal for a second. Take a breath and be honest, just with yourself. Have you ever used, say, a well-timed sigh?
Or silence. Calculated silence.
Maybe even tears, to shift a situation to get what you wanted.
It's uncomfortable to admit, isn't it?
Very. But what did those moments reveal about the power dynamics you navigate every day?
And here's a tricky part. Was that sigh, that silence, a conscious strategy? A deliberate move?
Or just how you felt in that moment, and it happened to have an effect?
Discerning intent. That's the maze. It's incredibly difficult, maybe impossible sometimes.
And think about how we label women as emotional, often dismissively.
As if it's a weakness.
But isn't understanding emotions, yours and others, actually a powerful tool for navigating life, for understanding people, and yes, for influencing them?
Emotional intelligence is a form of knowledge. Like any knowledge, it can be applied strategically. It's an asset.
Absolutely. And like any powerful tool, its application has ethical weight.
For sure.
Let's raise the stakes. Imagine your actual survival depended on convincing someone of something. No force, no threats, just words. What would you do?
Wow. That really strips it down, doesn't it?
Yeah, no room for niceties.
In a situation like that, the lines between persuasion, negotiation, manipulation, they probably blur into almost nothing.
Survival mode, pragmatism kicks in.
You do what you have to do to get the outcome you need.
Okay, bring me back to something more familiar, family dynamics. Who's often the unspoken expert on the guilt trip?
Oh, we've all seen that, haven't we? And what does it achieve?
Control, compliance. It can be incredibly effective. Corrosive, maybe, but effective.
What's interesting about guilt is how it works internally. It uses the other person's own conscience, their desire for approval, against them in a way.
It taps into our deepest social bonds. Oof. Okay, rapid fire questions. Is it manipulative to play on sympathy?
Context matters, intent matters.
Is it manipulative to withhold affection? To go cold?
Again, depends. Is it a pattern? Is it coercive?
Is it manipulative to make someone afraid of your disappointment? That quiet withdrawal?
These are exactly the gray areas, aren't they? The subtle shifts that can feel like crossing a line. It hinges on perception, on impact, on autonomy.
I value honesty. I really do. But I've also learned that sometimes, maybe, a carefully chosen half-truth prevents more damage than brutal honesty.
Strategic ambiguity. It's a real thing.
It feels like walking a tightrope sometimes between being truthful and managing the fallout.
Because sometimes full transparency right then and there could lead to worse outcomes. So is a more nuanced approach, even if it holds something back, the lesser evil. It's a tough call.
A therapist once told me something that really stuck. She said, manipulation is often the weapon of the powerless.
Wow. Yeah, that reframes it completely.
Right. It shifts the focus from someone wielding power to someone desperately trying to gain some.
It speaks to the underlying psychology. That feeling of having no direct control, that fear your needs won't be met.
So the outward display of control might actually mask a deep sense of powerlessness.
Fascinating and quite sad, really.
And sometimes you have to wonder, is the label manipulative just slapped onto women who are actually finally effectively using the limited power they do possess?
Who gets to decide what's effective use of power versus manipulation? Whose perspective defines that?
Exactly, because we praise male assertiveness, call it leadership.
But similar behavior in women gets labeled bossy, calculating, difficult.
So where is that line? It seems to shift depending on who's doing the influencing. The language reveals the bias.
And there's a long, long history of framing women with influence, especially outside traditional roles, as devious, scheming, unnatural even.
These stories serve a purpose, don't they? They reinforce the status quo.
They absolutely do. Okay, another moment for brutal honesty. Have you ever strategically played dumb?
Oh, maybe. Downplayed what you know to get your way, or just to avoid conflict.
What does that reveal about the expectations you feel you have to manage? It's a subtle dance, isn't it?
A performative thing. Sometimes acting less powerful is a strategy in itself within certain constraints.
It's maneuvering within the space you're given.
I knew someone once who always played the victim. And initially you feel sympathy.
But then you start to see the pattern.
Exactly. And you realize it wasn't weakness, it was a shield. And honestly, a pretty effective weapon. It made you question what strength even looks like.
Leveraging vulnerability, even if it's amped up or feigned. It taps into something deep in others, that protective instinct. It's a very subtle power play.
Okay, let's flip the script again. What if all these subtle ways women sometimes influence things? What if they're just a mirror?
A mirror of what?
A mirror of the indirect power structures they have to deal with every single day. Less about inherent traits, more about learned responses.
So shifting from individual psychology to systemic forces. If the playing field isn't level,
then the strategies you used to play have to be different, right? You adapt to the game as it is.
that makes sense. It's about survival and advancement within the system you're in.
So you might instinctively call it manipulation, but maybe pause and ask, could it actually be a survival tactic in a world that maybe doesn't listen to direct demands from that voice?
When shouting doesn't work, maybe whisper does. It's about agency within constraints.
Right.
Finding some way to exert control.
We saw this historically, didn't we? When women couldn't own property, couldn't vote, their power was elsewhere.
Social connections, emotional know-how, reading people. These were the tools. Different kind of power, but power nonetheless.
And it's amazing how that seemingly soft power could still shape things profoundly. Families, communities, even politics sometimes.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's a twist. Maybe the question isn't why some women might use these tactics more, but what if society has, maybe unconsciously, train them to see it as a valid option,
Yeah.
sometimes the only viable option for agency.
Ooh, that lands differently, doesn't it? It takes the blame off the individual and puts the spotlight back on the system.
It challenges that automatic negative judgment attached to the word manipulation, especially when it's applied to women. Maybe it's less about character flaws, more about learned strategies for navigating an unfair world.
So the manipulative woman trope.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just a woman who figured out how to play a rigged game with the hand she was dealt.
It forces you to look beyond the label, doesn't it? To see the context, the potential strategic intelligence behind it, understanding the unspoken rules.
Think back. Last time you felt completely unheard, totally powerless. What did you do? What little thing did you try to get seen, to get your needs met?
That feeling. It could spark creativity and finding influence, can't it? When the front door is locked, you look for a window.
Reflecting on that helps humanize it, I think. We all do it, maybe in small ways.
Yeah. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes just a whispers. Changes the air in the room.
And maybe that's learned through necessity, not choice.
Which brings us back to that first question I asked you. You still haven't really answered. If influence was your only weapon, truly the only one, how would you wield it?
Yeah. It hangs there, doesn't it? It holds up a mirror.
To our own potential, our own ethics around using subtle power.
And what if? What if calling something manipulative is just a convenient way to shut down the conversation? To avoid looking at the uncomfortable power dynamics underneath?
Labels could be powerful tools themselves, can't they? To silence things we don't want to confront. Does the label clarify, or does it just reinforce the existing order?
And which is worse, ultimately? Overt physical dominance, or that slow, subtle erosion of someone's self-worth through words?
Both leave scars. One is just less visible. But psychological manipulation can be utterly devastating. The effects linger.
It feels like society expects some people to play this intricate game on a tilted board. The rules themselves aren't fair.
That's a great metaphor. Playing chess with invisible handicaps adds layers of complexity.
Imagine trying to move a mountain, literally, with just your hands. You'd look for leverage, right? Any tiny advantage.
That's what subtle influence can feel like, finding a way when brute force is impossible. It's resourcefulness born from facing huge obstacles.
So think again about those times you felt powerless. What little tactics popped up? We all have them. Responses to being ignored.
Yeah, and reflecting on that helps us understand it in others, maybe with a bit more empathy.
They call it feminine wiles, often with that dismissive little smile.
Ugh.
But what if it's just a language? Learned because the dominant language, the direct one, wasn't being heard. What if it's about finally making someone listen?
It highlights how language itself diminishes certain kinds of power, doesn't it? Especially power that doesn't fit the usual, often male model.
I had a friend confess once. She said, I learned to cry strategically. Because sometimes, she said, it was the only way anyone would actually stop and listen. It's heartbreakingly honest, really.
That perfectly illustrates resorting to something perceived as manipulative out of a basic need. The need to be heard, to have your needs met.
So where is that line? Persuasion? Good. Manipulation? Bad. But is it a clear line? Or does it shift depending on who's doing it?
It feels like it shifts constantly. Perception is so key. The power dynamic between people, our interpretation of intent, the actual impact, it's all incredibly subjective.
And the old idea that some groups are just inherently sneakier?
Yeah.
Such an old trope.
And a damaging one.
Maybe they just had to be more creative, more resourceful, because, necessity, mother of invention.
Challenging those stereotypes is so important. Yeah. We need to look at situational pressures, not just assume inherent traits. That just feeds bias.
You really don't need a fist to control someone's world. A seed of doubt planted just right.
The power of suggestion. It can be terrifyingly effective. Targeting insecurities, beliefs, small inputs, massive effects.
So who benefits? Who benefits from pushing the narrative that certain groups are manipulative while others are just, say, assertive or strong?
What power structures does that story uphold? Looking at the function of the narrative is crucial. It often props up existing hierarchies.
I used to judge, people using tears or emotional displays. Then I had to get honest with myself about all the times I swallowed my anger.
Held back your strength.
Yeah. To avoid being labeled difficult or aggressive. We internalize these constraints, don't we?
It's that double bind, the narrow path of acceptable behavior, especially around gender and emotion.
Simone de Beauvoir said, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman.
Powerful idea.
What if that becoming within these structures inevitably involves learning these subtle strategies? What if manipulation, or what we call manipulation, is part of learning the script?
So it's not inherent, it's conditioned. Learned through navigating societal expectations, limitations, learning the unspoken rules of the game.
There is an unwritten script, isn't there, for certain groups? And maybe sometimes the only way to have agency is to subtly rewrite your lines, indirectly.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Subtle resistance. When a direct challenge is too risky, you find other ways to push back.
Have you ever felt you had to dim your own light, downplay your intelligence, your strength, just to fit in, to be accepted?
Those little compromises,
Uh,
they add up.
they really do. They chip away at your sense of self, but they also show the pressure to conform.
Maybe the whole violence versus manipulation thing is a false dichotomy.
How so?
Maybe they're just different points on a spectrum of control. Different tools born from the same root: desire, power, safety, survival.
So are some groups inherently more manipulative? Or just better practiced at using the tools deemed acceptable for them?
It keeps coming back to that, doesn't it? The constraints and the adaptations. It forces us to question our definition of manipulation itself. Is it biased?
And if the whole power structure flipped,
Right.
radically changed, would these patterns of influence change too?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. It suggests these behaviors are highly contingent on the system, not fixed traits.
We're quick to shame, aren't we? Especially certain groups for being manipulative. But do we stop and look at the pressures, the context that might lead there?
Shame rarely works without understanding. We need more empathy, more nuance, factoring in the social context.
Okay, final hypothetical. If someone's actual physical safety was constantly at risk,
Right.
wouldn't they be justified in using any means, even if it looked manipulative, to protect themselves? Survival often trumps etiquette.
In those extreme situations, the ethical landscape shifts completely. Self-preservation becomes the priority. What looks manipulative elsewhere becomes justifiable defense.
So maybe, just maybe, what we label manipulation is sometimes just the art of navigating a world that wasn't built with you in mind.
That's a powerful reframe. It offers understanding, agency where often there's only harsh judgment, adapting to an unequal playing field.
Think about powerful women in history books. How often are they called cunning, manipulative, scheming?
It's constant, isn't it? If they wield power outside the expected norms, they get pathologized. It reveals our discomfort with power that doesn't fit the mold.
And could it be? Could it be that the very qualities society encourages in women, empathy, emotional awareness, relationship focus, are the exact same qualities that make them potentially skilled influencers? The tools for connection are also tools for persuasion.
That duality is key. Skills developed for one purpose can be employed for another, sometimes in ways others see as manipulative.
I've been called manipulative. It stings.
Yeah.
But then I had to ask myself, okay, what was really going on there? What power dynamic was I pushing against? What imbalance felt wrong?
That self-reflection is vital. Using those moments as a prompt to dig deeper into the dynamics at play in your life and society.
Because ultimately, we all try to influence things every day in countless ways. That line between persuasion and manipulation, it's blurry, it's subjective, and it's definitely, as we've seen, heavily gendered.
Recognizing that, acknowledging the universality of influence and the biases in how we perceive it, that's the first step. Moving beyond simple judgment.
Remember that question right at the start. If you could control reality with a whisper,
Still thinking about it.
maybe your gut reaction reveals more about the society we live in, its power structures, than about your own individual morality. It really does provoke, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It forces us to confront our own understanding of power, agency, and those invisible ethical lines we draw.
The powerless often become masters of the subtle. Just don't mistake a survival strategy. Learn from navigating a world not built for you as inherent malice.
Let that sink in for a bit. This is definitely one you might need to sit with, revisit.
Yeah. And if this deep dive sparked something in you, made you question assumptions about power, about gender, maybe share it. Share this conversation with someone who needs to hear it too.
This was the deep dive. We don't pretend to have the easy answers. We just hope to make the questions a little harder and maybe, just maybe, a little more essential to ignore.